I really appreciate you listening to the podcast here. Let's go get started. All right, it's Friday. It's August 9th. I can't even believe it's August 9th, but I'm back to talk a little bit more about the Electoral College. Yesterday's podcast was a little bit of a history lesson, but it was really important to understand how we, knocked our way into where we are today. But today kind of has a little bit of the dirt. We'll look at the issues around the Electoral College and what you need to consider as a member of our democracy and how you think about the Electoral College. So if we think about today's modern Electoral College, what we have today, here's how it works. The system can seem complex, but it's really kind of simple. There are two ways this works. One is electoral votes, and this is with the presidency. Each state is allocated electors based on the total number of senators and representatives in Congress. So yesterday we learned that those numbers were skewed when voting because of the 3/5 compromise and who could vote. But ideally today, that's not the case. This is why we do the census every 10 years, is to find out where people are, where they have moved to, and how much representation they need in our democracy. So electoral votes is one. There are 538 electors, and a candidate needs a majority, which is 270 electoral votes to win a presidency. I don't know why those numbers are what they are. They are based, like I said, on how many senators and representatives we have in Congress, but I feel like it's not enough anymore. I mean, we're definitely a bigger country, but that's the reality. 538 electors and a candidate needs a majority, 270. This is always the big board they put up and talk about where the electors come in. This is why the swing states are so important, because those are electors that are easier to grab than, say, New York or California. We just tend to know how those big states are going to go, and we've become a cliche as a result, but I'm not complaining. The other is winner take all. And in most states, the candidate who wins the majority of the popular vote receives all of that state's electoral votes. So when you go to the polls on election day this fall in November, and you vote for your preference for president and vice president, those convert into electoral votes. And it takes X amount of winning. In our case, in California, it's a winner takes all. So if whoever wins in November for president on the California ballot takes our electoral votes, and those electoral votes they don't go Democrat or Republican. They tell you who they're for. I mean, they represent both parties is the point. Don't think of them as Democratic electors. That's at the conventions. Those are delegates, and those are at the conventions. Think of the Electoral College at this point as like, we're down to the decision making now. We don't have to do all the other running around. So as the Electoral College became more defined, think about the history we went through yesterday and what we've learned about how the Electoral College has come around. The tactics, as you would expect from a nation that really has a lot of lawyers. I grew up with one. Here I am. The tactics that could influence its outcomes also increased. So let's talk about some of the weird stuff that still happens with our Electoral College. The first is gerrymandering. And this is with a G, not J, like other Jerrys out there. This is Gerr, gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is the process of redrawing an electoral district. So now you know your state has 30 electors. It is possible for the electoral districts to be drawn, their boundaries to be drawn to favor a particular party. I think the city of Austin is one of these classic gerrymandered holy smoke situations. And I think if you call it up and look at the picture, you'll see what I mean. Because Austin would normally lean Democrat, and it's because it's a university town and it just attracts those kind of people to Austin. They have gerrymandered the borders of Austin such that they embrace a strong Republican base so that they water down or dilute the votes for a particular party, and they want to have it favor a different particular party. So gerrymandering primarily affects congressional elections. Spit it out, Jen. Gerrymandering primarily affects congressional elections, but it can impact the Electoral College by shaping which states the parties have control over and how the votes are allocated. Gerrymandering allows political parties to manipulate district lines to create safe districts. So this is a big deal. Mark Elias at Democracy Docket fights these all the time. As a purist, and I tend to always come at this stuff pretty principled because I am a purist. I'm like, I don't care. Just draw them with like a straight line and a pen or a pencil. Why do they have to be so gerrymandered that they hook up in here and make a left turn and then they go over to the right and they capture this little city over here? That's nuts. Just do it. Trust people's judgments. You don't have to cheat. And gerrymandering is essentially a way of cheating. So the pros, let's look at this because this comes up all the time. The pros are, if you gerrymander, you get a strategic advantage. You can almost ensure that you'll maintain or gain control over a particular state's electoral votes. You also get political stability. And Mitch McConnell can attest to this because that man has not moved for, well, I don't even know the recent time, maybe in the last 3 weeks. He's not ever been threatened. We have a lot of districts in the United States that have just been the same. And they have this political stability. And that political stability strengthens their power. And it actually gives them a lot of chutzpah when they get on the Hill and want to start to do things like pass legislation. The cons of gerrymandering, of course, are unfair representation. So you hear a lot about us going back to the popular vote. It's because we keep having presidents get elected who aren't who the people want by popular vote. By popular vote. This is really important. So one of the cons of gerrymandering is unfair representation. And the second is erosion of voter confidence. Because, if you're in a gerrymandered district and every time you try to vote, you just feel like you're going to lose, that's not fun. Nobody wants to lose every time. It's really tough. And if you always think you're going to win, then you don't have to hold yourself up to any standards, right? If you know you got this, then you can be a real piece of crap. We're not holding people to the American ideals, which is work harder, earn the vote, show up, represent me, talk about my interests as a voter. This is really important. So that's the pros and cons of gerrymandering. Then there's something called faithless electors. And this is a phenomenon where electors who for various reasons choose not to vote for the candidate they pledged to vote for. So when I go vote in the November election, however I vote triggers an elector. And that elector's job, that delegate's job, elector's job, is to vote for that candidate. That's how it works, except sometimes there's a faithless elector. It's rare, but it has occurred in several elections throughout history. And some states have laws that penalize or replace faithless electors, but others don't. And while no election has ever been decided by a faithless elector, their existence adds another layer of complexity and unpredictability. And this, by the way, this faithless electors bucket was actually the thing that came into play when Biden was first being asked to step down. People were really concerned about this. When electors just go nuts and change their votes because we were toying with chaos. Luckily, it didn't happen, but that is where the vulnerability lay in the faithless electors. So the pros of a faithless elector is it allows you to be a moral decision maker. That's pretty, that's interesting, a moral decision maker. And I do expect people to behave with some morality, although that's where we could disagree about what that morality is. But I appreciate the sentiment. So faithless electors can serve as a safeguard if something just seems very, very wrong. And it also allows for some flexibility. There could be some ways that changing their votes could make a big difference. It's anybody who's invested in elections doesn't want these things to happen because a lot of money spent along the way here, and faithless electors are not necessarily our friends. The downside of a faithless elector, of course, is unpredictability. That's right there. That's right in the wallet, baby. Nobody wants to know their spend isn't going to work the way they wanted the spend to work. And of course, there's potential for abuse. These things all came up when the will Joe Biden step down question hit the media. These were all questions that came up. And then there's the last one, and this is absolutely within the Democratic Party. And it's interesting because if you look at the cultures of the two parties, this totally makes sense to me, because Democrats have a habit of tripping over their own feet. I don't know why we do this. I think it's in our effort to, and I'm a Democrat, not a secret, but I think it's in our effort to try to make everybody happy. We become annoying, just so annoying, and we screw ourselves. So a superdelegate is important in the Democratic Party's nomination process, because they're leaders who have the power to cast a vote, and they're independent of how we vote in the election. They're independent of the outcome of the state primary and caucuses. Unlike regular delegates who are bound to support a candidate, a superdelegate can support any candidate they choose. And in California, this is a really big thing, and it's kind of how the Democrats manage their power, I guess is what I'd say, and use the elders. The elders would be one way to go. And we've seen this happen on the Republican side as well. I mean, the elders absolutely influence. They just don't have the superdelegate component. So this has been a democratic way to deal with this. The pros of a superdelegate is that they're experienced decision makers. So they have a deep understanding of the political landscape, and their votes can be a stabilizing force in closely contested primaries. So yeah, it's a little bit of putting your hand on the scale. And the second is for party unity. Superdelegates can play a role in ensuring the party nominates a candidate who's most likely unified in the party. I can see where this would have been really important before social media, and when we had to do a lot more communication through older channels. But I really think that this idea of superdelegates has probably dropped down in its influence if you think about how you can follow people today directly who you consider to have the judgment you trust. So regardless of party, there are probably a few people out there for you who are a bellwether. And so a superdelegate used to be that person, I believe in. I think it probably was pretty effective with older communication styles, but now you can literally follow them. If you're lucky, you can actually talk to them. So party unity, I think, is probably not so much the upside that it used to be. The downside of the superdelegates is the perception of elitism. Yep, that's so true. It's just they undermine the democratic process by their very nature of existing, and they have disproportionate influence. And then, of course, there's potential for conflict. And I think we all are done with conflict. But the superdelegates can be, I'm not going to say bad actors, but can create tension and be, let's call them shit disturbers. That's better than a bad actor. So there's your superdelegates. Okay, put those on the side, because those are three ways that the Electoral College is being kind of monkeyed with. Then there's this whole issue of, is the Electoral College what we need for our democracy today? In the last 5 years, several proposals have emerged to reform the Electoral College. One is the most prominent is the National Popular Vote. Why do they name these things? The worst names. Look at these words they put together. National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Oh yeah, that's the NPVIC. This initiative is trying to ensure the presidency is awarded to the candidate who wins the popular vote nationwide without needing a constitutional amendment. States that join the compact agree to allocate their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. But the compact only takes effect if the states representing at least 270 electoral votes decide to participate. So, let's talk about the pros of a national popular vote. If we went ahead with this, alignment with the popular vote will ensure the candidate who wins the most votes become president. And this will address frustration many feel when a candidate wins the popular vote but loses the Electoral College. It will reduce the impact of swing state focus because no more will we be seeing fights for those selected electoral votes. It's just going to be a popular vote. And it's very inclusive. It means what we want is represented by a vote, and it's direct, straight line. And of course, it simplifies the electoral process. This would make it clear that the candidate winning the most votes wins. It just removes the confusion and the controversy and all this weird election night electoral vote nonsense. So, what's the downside? Okay, probably a ton of legal challenges because it's not a constitutional amendment if we were to get through that. There's a lot of concern this will undermine state sovereignty because now we are one at a federal level as voters, which has not really been something we have done. And we risk marginalizing smaller states. So smaller states might receive less attention from candidates who would concentrate on the populous areas. This is an interesting one to me because maybe we could make a rule about how campaigning works. But in California, because we tend to just vote as a block most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, national politics doesn't come here that often. They come from money. I'm not going to that. I think the last time I went to a political rally was at Crissy Field in San Francisco, and it might have been Al Gore. I don't know. I have to go back. It was a long time ago because candidates just don't come to campaign. Like with rallies like you see on TV, we just don't get those in California. Not at all. We just get expensive dinners with people who make way more money than any of us. So if the Electoral College is abolished, the United States would shift to a direct popular vote system. We would have a true majority rule because it would be based on who we all say we want. It would probably increase voter engagement. How many times would people say my vote doesn't matter, my vote doesn't count? Well, it absolutely would, and it would make you probably feel like you have a bit more agency in voting. It will eliminate swing state politics, which means there's a whole bunch of states who get ads nonstop from now until that Tuesday in November, who I've heard sometimes just want to kill themselves because these ads are so many ads. And those of us non-swing states, we have no idea how bad this is. If we abolish the Electoral College, we do face a few risks too. Maybe a loss of federal balance because more populous states would dominate. Let's face that. Maybe we would have more regional divides. So we'd see, this is interesting because I think it's actually played out in the last 8 years, but we'd see candidates really focusing heavily on certain regions. So that's one where we could see potential regional divides and more division. That would be bad. And then, of course, challenges in implementing the change. We would need to do a constitutional amendment, and we really have to have broad political consensus. So it's something for you to think about. It's not perfect. I mean, this is Welcome to America. It's imperfect as crap, but it's also amazing, right? I mean, it's just I just got a discount. I got a free Impossible Burger today, people. In America, you can still get a free Impossible Burger if you buy it on the 5-year anniversary at Burger King. I don't know, but that happened. So I'm just saying, America's really good. Even though we have flaws, even though there's things to get fixed, I think working on them and being part of the solution is actually one of the coolest things about our citizenry. Okay, so this weekend, I'm going to come at you with a bit about the Speaker of the House. I'm trying to look on the weekends at some of the positions that are really important in our democracy, and the Speaker of the House has had some colorful characters and controversy and leadership and all different styles. And it absolutely can be a critical part of our 3 branches of government. So we'll take a look at that over the weekend and then come out next week ready for, I believe our convention is going to start. Our big next convention is going to come up. I'm saying our convention, meaning America's convention, because conventions are interesting. And this one should be good. Again, the Republicans really had theirs very, very early. So I don't have a lot to say about that one because I actually missed it. And so here we are. We'll be looking at that and how this democracy and democratic process works as we move forward. Thank you for listening, and subscribe and share. I really appreciate it. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Make sure you subscribe and rate, and I'll be back with another episode really soon.